A very good morning to all the viewers of this video conference. I am C. Manu Agarwal, Chairman of Digital Accounting and Assurance Board. I have with me today the Vice Chairman of the Board, a very able and dynamic young council member from Hyderabad, C. Dayanuraj Sharma ji. I have Harish Duaji, who's been a key person in creating all these forensic standards. He's been involved in this since inception and has brought it to a conclusion, and we have the standards ready. I also have with me two very able colleagues and faculty members who were there, who were involved in creation of the standards and are going to discuss them today. Satish Noyji and Durgesh Pandeyji. And I accord a very warm welcome to the Honorable Vice President of the Institute, C.A. Rakshish Mitra, who's just joined. Very warm welcome to you, Vice President, sir.
My great pleasure of being here. A very good morning to all of you.
So friends, today is a historic sort of day. We at the Institute of Chartered Accountants are proud to inform you that we are the first professional institute in the whole world who has created a comprehensive set of forensic standards. And this has been done with the help of a very dedicated team, a very dedicated task force which we created, in which some of the members you will be seeing today as faculty members, and there are many, many more behind the scenes who have done the hard work. And I would say that all this was possible with the great support, with the great help of the leadership of the Institute, the President and the Vice President. The President would be just joining us in the next few minutes. And friends, I'll just tell you that some 65 chartered accountants got involved in this exercise and put in more than 1,000 hours of man hours, and that is how we came to it. We recognize the need because forensic investigation is a branch which has slowly started to flourish in the country, and the requirement is increasing day by day. When we went into detail, we found out that in spite of the requirement increasing, there was no set pattern for conducting the investigation and for reporting. Both these were missing. So we as an institute thought that it would be best if we take it forward and create those standards so that it could act as a guide, as a help, and as a benchmark for our members who do these forensic assignments. The forensic standards were passed by the council and now are recommendatory in nature and would slowly but surely be made mandatory. The tentative date today, as of today, is 1st of April 2023. That is what we have decided. So, friends, I think the President would take another few minutes. So, before he comes, I would straight away invite the Honorable Vice President of the Institute for his remarks and for his view.
Thank you very much, Manu Agarwal ji, the Chairman of Digital Accounting and Assurance Standards Board, Dayanuraj Sharma ji, my council colleague, President, I think, is going to join us, Harish Duaji, Satish Shenoy, Durgesh Pandey, and everybody else who are listening to me. A very, very good morning to all of you. Let me tell you, we were, having a meeting of the CAs in public practice. Or public service, sorry, not practice, public service in Udaipur last 2 days. I just came back to Calcutta only last week. And there we had our chartered accountant ministers, chartered accountants, members of parliament, chartered accountant judges, chartered accountants, IAS officers, IPS officers, who is who, about 50 of them were present. Right? And many of them, they spoke about the need to have forensic standards and for the need for the institute to be a leader in this matter. And then when we spoke about the 23 standards that we have developed extremely proudly, many of them who are aware, they were, they were saying very nice. Many of them who were not aware said that this is where the institute should move. This is the kind of direction that the institute should take, because they were of the feeling that the institute should move into newer areas and be innovative. I have been following the development of these standards for the past 1 year under the leadership of Manu Agarwalji and Dayanivas Sharmaji, and both of them, they have, along with a team of 65, I think it is 65,000 hours they have put up for this, development. And every time they came to the council with all the developments that has taken place, many of us sitting in the council would see the kind of hard work that has been gone behind the development of these standards. So see, we are extremely proud that these 23 standards are now in public domain. We are extremely proud that the institute is now, will be known in an area, for an area in which it was not so much known earlier. We are extremely proud of the fact that these standards, 23 of them developed by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, would be that it would be one of the first institute in the world to have developed these standards. And let me tell you, now comes the next step. We have to prepare guidance note, technical guides to help the members, tackle these standards, to help the members understand these standards. Because we have developed, congratulations to the team, but now the next step is to propagate the standards amongst the membership and to help them understand about the rudiments of the standards. So let me tell you, at the Institute, we are not only these standards, that Digital Accounting and Assurance Standards Board. We want this board to involve itself into other innovative areas like AI, artificial intelligence, blockchain, data analytics, cyber security. All these are the areas in which we would want this, this board to be developed in. Because these are the new innovative areas. And we at the Institute believe that unless we innovate, unless we go off the beaten track, the Institute's importance will not be enhanced. And today, when you develop the standards, I believe that the Institute's reputation will only be enhanced by these standards. I would request Manu Agarwalji and Dayanivas Sharmaji to do everything possible to popularize the standards amongst the membership. Because these standards will not have great value unless the membership and the stakeholders embrace the standards, right? And consequent to these standards, as I said earlier, maybe you should get out many technical guides, guidance notes, so that and I would like to see lot of noise on these standards in the social media going forward, right? So I would like to congratulate DAB, Digital Accounting and Assurance Standards Board, the chairman Manu Agarwal, Dayanivas Sharma, and every Harish Dua and everybody else for all their efforts. And these efforts have been over a period of, as I said, 1 year in developing the standards. I wish DAB the very best. And I wish that these standards will be unique and it will stand the test of time, and it will make the Institute proud that these 23 standards have been developed under the aegis of the second largest accounting body in the world, the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice President, sir. And yes, sir, we totally agree. And as per your vision, we have already started preparation for coming out with the guidance notes. We understand the requirement, and we will surely do that also. And the second thing which you advised us about is popularizing them. We are starting that by this program today, and we will continue to do that and ensure that the members become fully aware of these things. With this, I request a small video to be played by the office just to give an overview of what we've done. Well, friends, that was a brief preview of the video. Now I hand over the proceedings to Dayanivas Sharmaji. We have a small uh, formality pending, that is the release of the forensic standards, which we will do when the president joins. So thereby you take it forward and we will keep the proceedings on, and as soon as the president joins, we will have the release. So over to you there.
Thank you, Chairman, sir. It's indeed a pleasure to actually come and be part of this historic day. I think there is no institute in the world which, on a pro bono basis, the chartered accountants have contributed without thinking for a commercial thought. And I compliment each one of them who have given their valuable 65,000 hours in the entire process. Harishji, with you and Amit, I compliment each one who have participated in such a nice manner and used the crisis time very effectively. I think the best part was saving almost around $700,000 just on, not traveling and the other cost which was being saved. And what more we can say when we talk about Digital Accounting and Assurance Board, when we talk about digitization, I think we will be the first institute in the world to release this kind of beautiful standards. Compliment to you all. I really, really admire the kind of passion you all have in the entire process. Seriously, it's like, I can't imagine, even if we were busy with some other meetings, all the people like Satish ji, Durgesh, including Murli Krishna ji and all people, including the council members like MPV. Then we have people like Aniket Talati, Anil Bhandari, all those people, Ranjit Agarwal, Nanda ji, all people have contributed in such a beautiful manner. I don't think in the world, Harish ji, you have seen the world across, including the regulators. We have one point which is to be noted. It is with cost. They have to incur cost. But I'm proud today, the world's best and forensic standards are coming out on a pro bono basis, and there cannot be a bigger event in the world. And we can challenge the world that, this is the value which our chartered accountants give to the society. This is something which is very, very, very important. Till the time President joins, I'll just express my views and thoughts in the entire process. Reason only one thing, I am actually suffering with 101 fever, but I cannot, forget that, the kind of efforts we have put in for the 65,000 hours, it can be just kept away. The temperature is high on the forensic standards, but yes, we have our President sir who has already joined us. The moment President sir is okay to share his views, we'll move on to sir. President sir.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning, sir. Sir, we request. I know that you are on the airport, and I think DAB is proving to be DAB with using the technology to the last level. And we have got you from your personal time on the airport. Yes, but there is no other option, and there is no bigger movement in the country or a nation as such, where we are actually releasing the world's first forensic standard under your leadership. A man with so much of positivity, encouragement, and enthusiasm. We can't even imagine the leadership going to that particular level. Sir, I think we all are so happy that the 65,000 hours which are being put by our chartered accountants on pro bono basis, without a single cost, we will be the first institute in the world to demonstrate to the world that, our chartered accountants are not commercially oriented. So, over to you, President sir, for your words of wisdom.
Thank you, Dayaji. Manuji and Dayaji, the Chairman and Vice Chairman of Digital Accounting and Assurance Board. And let me, at the outset, compliment both of you for coming out with forensic standards. And today we are launching them. All those who put so many hours of their time into the making of these standards and finally putting it before the council for its approval. I understand what kind of time, what kind of energy and what kind of intellect has gone into the making of these standards. And we being our institute being the first accounting body to come out with forensic standards, I think it is a pride moment for each one of us that we are the first one to come out. I may only mention one or two things. See, I have heard apprehension of some of the practicing members, and they were asking a question whether with this standard we will be better off or we will have some disadvantage too. They were referring to the other professionals who are not chartered accountants and who are not subject to any standard. Will they compromise and take advantage of this situation? Let me tell you very frankly, today time has come when the society, government and the entire world is expecting transparency, integrity and independence. At such time, if a profession has come out with standards which its members are supposed to follow, it is a positive signal for everybody, every stakeholder. It is not a negative signal, and in fact, this will strengthen chartered accountants as forensic auditors. And that is the biggest advantage of these standards. And I'm sure that members will realize it in very short term when this news will spread in the public, and we will give an appropriate press release also to demonstrate what institute has done, what its committee has done, and what so many chartered accountants who have put their time, intellect and efforts have done. The entire society will be apprised of what is the reality, and we will get benefit of these standards, and there will be no obstacle or there will be no disadvantage to the profession. So with this, I once again congratulate the chairman and vice chairman of DAB for at right time coming out with these standards. Thank you.
Thank you, President Sir. With your hands, we would quickly release the book of the forensic and standards, the compendium for forensic standards.
Right.
Thank you very much for releasing this, and let us be the first institute in the world to release this document, sir.
Big congratulations to the President. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Congratulations to you and Dayaji both. Manoj.
Thank you, sir, for all your support, for all the help required in releasing these standards. A big thank you to you.
You can stop sharing, Amit. Thank you, President, sir. And
may I take leave to log off? The reason being, I have to take flight to another destination.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, President, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
Friends, you've heard the President and has been releasing this forensic standard compendium. Rather, I can say one more point which I wanted to extend. Harish ji, Satish ji, Durgesh bhai, I think we need to actually make it more popular by saying one thing. Individually in forensic standards, we cannot grow. What sir was talking about, whether it is going to be a boon or it's going to impact us in different manner. The fact, friends, we have corporate form of practice, which is very, very well taken and which has been accepted. I think we need to actually think about getting into the corporate form of practice. Make firms which are of 10 partners, the corporate form of practice, or might be a networking, which is going to be recognized, because all the empanelment, Harishji, not only the firm, they also consider the entire network. So people are not aware on that particular aspect. But if you are going to use the standards effectively and you are going to complete your forensic standards, and then you make a group of people which is going to be expert in this particular area, I think nation will recognize you, and multiple bodies, whether it is SEBI, whether it is CNAG, whether it is RBI, whether it is IBA, whether it is government agencies, GST, income tax, everywhere forensic is going to be the talk of town in the entire time to come. And what was happening is, earlier we didn't have the framework in which we wanted to set this entire reporting requirement. With these standards, we will have that framework with us. So wish you all a great learning experience. Today we have 7 faculties who are going to take up. I think this is one of the most unique programs which we have done in the shortest time, that we are going to have 7 learned people who have participated in making this entire forensic standards. I compliment each one at the entire 65 numbers and 65,000 hours which are being put wholeheartedly, I don't think it will take one more decade to come with this kind of contribution in times to come. So let us enjoy, cherish this entire moment and ensure that rather than finding shortcomings, let us think about what big can be made out of it. That is the game which is going to be played. And you will be listening to all the learned speakers. I hand over this session to Harish Duwaji, who was the person who was driving the seat and taking us to the entire discussion today. Harish ji, I hand over this session to you and request you to kindly take it up with the sequence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dayanivas ji. Thank you, Manu Agarwal sir. And thank you to the chair, the president and vice president for coming and gracing the occasion and helping us launch these standards. I hope I'm audible. One thing, Dayaji, that I'd like to emphasize, I know Manuji and you have already mentioned it, but one of the greatest achievements that we are maybe underplaying is the fact that this all has been done within a space of 1 year. Last August, when I was invited to join and I was told that we have some aggressive timelines, I thought that maybe, a couple of years will do it, because I've been involved in other standard settings and the time frame there has been somewhat not as aggressive as we had here. But getting 23 standards out in 1 year is such a mammoth task. I mean, it's unbelievable that we've actually achieved it. And this is no doubt, this is due to the true leadership that has been demonstrated in this case, right from the top, from the presidents to the of the institute and also the chairman, vice chairman of the body, and quite honestly, with active participation of half a dozen members of the council, Anil ji, Talati ji, MPB sir. You name it, all of them have been involved in these meetings on and off continuously without fail. In fact, all the study group meetings, there was always plenty of council members there to provide their inputs along the way. So I think congratulations to everyone. With that opening, let me move on to make my small presentation and then we will start the proceedings with regard to the education nature of this webinar. Folks, what you will find is that you will get a very high level, top level view today. These standards will run into something like 150, 200 pages. And therefore, it won't do much justice if we start getting into the details in this session. We will certainly have more sessions along the way where we get into the education part of the document, but today it will be more of a awareness session. So it will be a high helicopter view, as they say, for today. So let me start by sharing my screen. I have a small presentation to cover my bit. Amit, are you able to see the screen? Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Very quickly, a quick overview. We have basically these SAMR 7 categories. The overarching documents are 3 in nature: preface, framework, basic principles. I will cover this in a moment. And then you will have separate speakers like Durgesh ji covering key concepts, Satish ji covering engagement management, and the other speakers covering the other areas. I will then come back towards the end to cover reporting quality. But as you can see, these 23 standards, actually there are 24. One of them is still work in process. It had various discussions and it could not be released in time on related and connected parties. Other than that, all of these standards have been now approved by the council and will be part of the compendium that will be coming out so that we can all start immersing ourselves in the details of these standards. Today, you will get a quick snapshot of what they are basically composed of, more or less like an essence of the standards. Okay, so with that in mind, I will cover these 3 documents: the preface, framework, and basic principles. Basically, the overarching nature of the document means that these concepts that are presenting here apply to all the standards. And they basically introduced the standard to us. They outline the process of the standard setting process. And then the framework gets into more details, which I'll cover in a moment. But as far as the overview of the standard is concerned, the underlying objective is to introduce consistency amongst all our members whenever we are involved in conducting these kind of assignments, be they forensic accounting assignments or fraud investigations or things of that nature. The idea is to allow the standards to bring in a level of consistency and a minimum quality benchmark, so that whenever a receiver of our report or whenever we get engaged and the receiver of the report is reading the report, they know that this will deliver a basic level of quality that can be expected of a professional chartered accountant. They're the first in the world, and I'll just give you a quick snapshot. Basically, this is not a hollow claim. If you go to the Institute of the CPA in the USA, they have one statement on standards on forensic services, which have got affected last year. They came out with this recently. UK doesn't actually have a standard at all. Members of the Institute of Chartered Accounting England, Wales, they basically follow the standard put out by the Financial Reporting Council, which doesn't actually have a separate standard on forensics. Canada has a standard that they came out way back in 2006. And they talk about investigation and forensic accounting. One standard is there. And similarly, Australia, I would say Australia has one of the best standards. They have one standard called APES 215 of Forensic Accounting Services. And this is basically one standard amongst various other specialist pronouncements like taxation and a whole lot of other things. So, friends, what we're talking about is what the Institute is putting out is 23 standards, which is a full body of knowledge in the area of forensic, right from concepts to principles to the management of the engagement to the detailed execution of the engagement to reporting and quality control. This is one body of knowledge that there is no other financial accounting body in the world that has come out with these kind of standards, which is why we are proud to be able to claim that we are the one body that is the first body that is generated this knowledge, putting it out in the domain, and thereby exhibiting global leadership in this area. So I think all members of the Institute have a cause for celebration and a reason to be proud of being able to, take leadership in this area. So this is with this in mind, let me move on to the other basic concepts that have come out in the standards. For example, these standards are, for the first time, principle-based, meaning they basically set the outline or the principles and the outcome expected from the subject matter. So they don't get into how we need to do it, but they focus on what is expected of the professional, not the how. The details of how will come out later in the form of guidance notes, which will be recommendatory in nature. We will have implementation guides that will clarify on how each element of the standard needs to be implemented. And then there will be technical guides getting into the details of some of the finer nuances, especially when we get to specialized areas like digital domain and the forensics and data analytics and things like that. Technical guides will help the professional implement these standards in those unique circumstances. The other thing that the standards bring is that they are going to be mandatory in nature. For the time being, they're released in recommendatory form till March 2023. And over the course of the next year or two, we will iron out any of the implementation challenges. And by 2023, they will become mandatory on all ICAI members. And they will be mandatory for all FAI engagement, forensic and investigation statement engagements. The guidance notes, which will support these standards, will always remain in recommendatory form because that is where the professional has to exercise his judgment, and the judgment will be exercised as per the circumstances, and that's why the The how is very much a recommended part. Now, as you know, currently anyone can conduct these assignments, forensic assignments or investigation assignments, but the members, the standards cannot be imposed on non-members. They can only be implemented on the members. But there is a high probability, in the absence of any other standards, that the government may choose to make these standards mandatory on everybody in probably a truncated manner, like they may only apply to listed companies or frauds over a certain amount and things of that nature. But that's for the future. We'll wait and see on how things pan out as we proceed along this line. So getting back to our overarching documents, that is in a nutshell what the preface introduces the standards. There is a set manner. The process of setting standard is very elaborate, despite having 6 essential steps that we have to follow. I won't get into the details of this. Suffice to say that it went through a very detailed, deliberation-driven process where 30 days were given for exposing these drafts to the members of the public, to all the professional community, including the regulatory and government bodies. And many of them came back to us with their suggestions and other recommendations, which were incorporated where felt necessary before DAB reviewed it again and the council approved it. So very extensive process is what we went through, and therefore they are unique in that nature, very path-breaking in that nature, and of course original in thought. This is the standard process that is followed by the issued on all standards, including auditing, accounting standards. The only deviation is when we bring out the guidance note, we might skip the 30-day exposure draft depending on the nature of the topic. But that's the process that we have in place. Now, what is the framework? Framework is basically a structure that is put together to explain to us how these standards come together, because there are different components of the whole standards. In fact, let me just give you that Pythonian. This is the manner in which it's getting depicted. Basically, it starts with the definition. 3 definitions are here on the right-hand side. It is supported by basic principles, which I will cover. Key concepts is another thing that Durgesh will cover later on. And that's another supporting pillar. And then we have the body of the standards from series 100 onwards. Guidance notes, which are the recommendatory, will also be part of the whole framework. And all of this sits on the foundation of the ethics, code of ethics. So that's basically how this all comes together. The definitions on forensic accounting is very simple. It is basically the discovery and evaluation of evidence by a professional to interpret and communicate findings suitable for a court of law. The important thing is discovery. Forensic accounting is primarily discovery of facts, and facts that can be challenged in a court of law, and therefore they have to withhold the scrutiny of basically cross-examination and things of that nature. That is why forensic accounting, that's where the forensic accounting gets its strength from. Basically, being able to present evidence in a solid manner. And then, of course, investigation takes that discovery of evidence and analyzes it in a very systematic and critical manner to make sure that they are able to achieve a specific purpose, like is there a fraud or not. So both of those go hand in hand, although forensic accounting is a precursor to an investigation, because forensic accounting basically is the discovery of the facts, whereas investigation takes it to the next level of analyzing and examining in a much more detailed manner by linking it with the requirements to see if there's a violation or not and things like that. So those are the key definitions that form the framework. The speech standard has taken a very strict manner of, it's very simple, generally 3 to 4 pages, maximum 5 pages document, which covers these 6 areas of introduction, why the standard is there, what are the requirements. Basically, this is where you see what is expected of the professional, Explanatory comments basically expand on the requirements a little bit. And then we also have a section that says, what is the documentation that should be in place to be able to demonstrate that we have complied with the standards. And then the sixth section is on the effective date. So this is a quick overview of the framework and the definitions. Now, one thing I want to make it clear here, which is something that the standards are emphasizing all along, and there will be a bit of a challenge because everybody is using the word audit in a very misnomer form. These standards actually make a very clear distinction between what an audit is, what a forensic accounting is, and what an investigation is. I've already covered forensic accounting and investigation. Audit is something I want to mention here, is basically very different from these two. In fact, if you are doing an audit, you cannot be doing forensic or investigation, because audit is primarily providing assurance and expressing an independent opinion, which is not what these standards do. These standards of auditing apply in the case of an audit. And when you are an auditor, you cannot be doing forensic accounting and investigation, which is why these standards make it very clear that forensic audit as a concept doesn't exist. It's actually a misnomer, an oxymoron, as they say. An audit has limited procedures and limited approach and is dependent on materiality and sample selection. We don't get into those kind of things in forensic accounting and in investigation. And we'll cover that as we get more and more into it. Some of the speakers will talk a little bit more about that under objectives and things like that. So let me not spend too much time on it. And basically, finally, I wanted to just talk about the basic principles. These are basically 10 principles we have. 5 of these, the top 5, are the attributes that a professional needs to have, without which he cannot do any forensic accounting or investigation exercise. He has to be independent, he has to have integrity and objectivity, take due professional care, maintain confidentiality, and have the skills and competence to do the job. I won't be covering this in any detail because these are all something we're all aware of. The next 5 are regarding the performance of the engagement, which is where the engagement gets its credibility. The professional has to make sure that he's familiar with the situation in hand. Every context matters. Truth is the topmost primary factor that we take into account. The job of the FAI's professional is to find the truth in whatever form. It could be guilty or not guilty, or fraud, no fraud, whatever it is. Our job is to lay the truth on the table, the evidence on the table, which speaks for itself. We have to respect the rights and obligations of everyone. We have to separate the facts from the opinions, and we have to have a quality control mindset, which is continuously improving. So I will stop here now as far as my presentation goes, and I will request the next presenter, Durgesh, to now take over the next part.
Thank you, Harish sir. Thank you so much for laying the foundation firm. So we will start with the key concepts. We have 4 standards for the key concepts, and we will be discussing that. A lot of that have been very briefly touched by Dua sir. Let me share my screen. I have a small presentation of 10-12 slides. Okay, so the 4 standards which I'll be discussing and which form part of the key concept are FAIS 110, 120, 130 and 140. Now, these 4 standards, these have been classified as the key concept for a purpose. These key concept, these standards on key concept, these standards are applicable to all assignments of the nature of forensic accounting and investigation. Friends, you must notice that we are deliberately using the word forensic accounting and investigation in the standards. So we definitely have a line of difference between the forensic accounting and investigation services. That is why you will see during the entire document of the standards, these two terms have been used separately, forensic accounting and investigation. This difference and detailing has been considered in the standard 110, understanding the nature of the engagement. Next, we go to the fraud risk, because most of the forensic accounting standards, most of the FAIs will be dealing with some sort of dispute, some sort of fraud, probably in arbitration proceedings, probably in a reconciliation proceeding, probably there has to be some sort of allegation where these services will be offered and these standards will come into play. So understanding the fraud risk becomes essential and cornerstone of the assignment. By that way, we can prioritize that as well. Next is on the laws and regulations. Let us understand these standards and the services that we will be offering by using these standards. They will form a litigation support activity. The moment we call them litigation support activity, these standards will be having a lot of flavor of law, and these will involve detailed application of law for most of the assignment. So there may be some specialized assignment which come out of as a result of some law, or there may be there are certain laws which are applicable to all types of assignments. This we'll be discussing in the laws and regulations. Next, what we have is the hypothesis. Now this we have put it as key concept. There may be a deliberation that this can be part of the work procedure or this can be part of the execution standards. But friends, to emphasize the importance and to check upon and to emphasize that the applicability of the concept of hypothesis to all forensic assignment, this has deliberately and consciously be put in the key concept because of its sheer importance. The assignment has to start in dark, and then slowly and steadily there is a beam of light and thereby going to the full focus light. That is the reason we will be needing hypothesis. Now, very quickly, as it was said multiple times during the session, that this will be a high level document. This will be a high level document. And in the words of Harish sir, this is a helicopter view of the standards. So we are not getting a lot into the deep dive of the standards. However, we will be going through only with the basics of the standards. We will be having, this is more of an awareness session rather than education. So we'll be having the education at the later time. Now, coming to the nature of engagement. This is FAIS 110, the first standard. This is for the nature of the assignment. This standard says that the nature of assignment has to be understood first. So the introduction and the scope is very clear as to, first thing is that we have to understand what is the nature of the engagement, whether it is a forensic accounting engagement, whether it is an investigation, whether it is litigation support. Now, both of them together can become part of litigation support. But then friends, I would like to differentiate what exactly will come under forensic accounting and investigation. See, mind you, when we do our assignment or during course of my practice, I have noticed that the allegations which come to us where we have to investigate, they can by and large be bifurcated into two parts. Certain assignments, of course, everything boils down to finance, but certain assignment, finance is the crux, money is the crux, finance is the crux, as to we have to apply the accounting principles and find the and do the assignment. That will be covered by forensic accounting. Whereas certain assignments, money or financial transaction or money transactions do not come into play. I can give you an example. we are conducting a case, or for an example, a case can be seen where we are conducting the students in a university as to what is the number of students who have come. Now, this has nothing to do with finance. However, it's an investigative job where the functions, where the principles of forensics have to be applied and the report has to be acceptable to the forum. So that assignment will be covered under the investigation scope. And then comes the litigation support. Litigation support comes out of a litigation pending or to be pending in court of law, and it can be in the nature of either of us. Now, friends, the standard in its objectives very clearly defines that the purpose, clarity of purpose has to be very clearly spelled out. There has to be a matching of goals by the professional and the person who's engaging the professional. The engagement approach and the broad scope as to what will be covered, what will not be covered. We should remember that, friends, most of the assignments comes out of dispute. And when the assignments comes out of dispute, the scope is very fluid at that point of time. We really don't know as to how deep we have to go, what should be the engagement approach. So a high-level document as to what should be the scope, what should be the engagement approach, all these things needs to be spelled out, and this is governed by this standard. Again, specific skills. If we need somebody with digital forensics, if we need somebody who's an explosive expert, if we need somebody who understands fire accelerators, all these specific skills have to be identified and they have to be put as part of the engagement document, which is dealt with later on. Next, understanding the requirement and the explanation. As I said that, and this has been said earlier also, it is the standard categorically makes it clear, wide para 3.1, that such assignment shall not be called as a forensic audit. This specific clarity is given for the purpose that there should not be any confusion amongst the stakeholders that we are expressing, a forensic professional is expressing opinion on the financial statement. So it is categorically clear that it is not a audit assignment. Whereas statutory audit and internal audit, these audits are starters for a forensic assignment. They may give the red flags which are important to start a forensic assignment. As I said earlier, application of accounting skills will be covered in forensic accounting, and discovery of evidence specifically for the operational part. So the financial part and the operational part, the financial transaction, the money trail, and the, say for an example, valuation of stock. These things will form part of the investigation. The central idea for both of this is same, that the document will be used as evidence in court of law. Okay, so statutory audit and internal audit, they can be a starting point for investigation. Forensic accounting aspires to highlight the accounting or legal violation. Now, friends, you'll notice that in these standards, we have a para 5, that is the structure of the standards. We have para 5 where it shows documentation for work procedure. Now, this is a very important para which is there in all the document. We need to preserve, we need to create, and we need to preserve certain documents which demonstrate that we have followed and we have applied this standard in both letter and spirit. This is confirmation that the standards have been followed, the standards have been read. So correspondences, minutes of meeting, communication documents, all these will fall, all these can be used as confirmation to the work procedures, that the work procedures have been followed and they have been preserved. Okay, friends, let us come to the next standard, that is 120, fraud risk. Now, risk is an integral part of any forensic assignment. Again, this spells out of the internal audit, the internal control, what we do. Friends, if we begin an assignment, the degree of risk is not same for all kind of transactions. There are certain transactions which are highly risky, whereas there are certain transactions which are not as risky as the predecessors are ought to be. So this prioritizing of risk is being dealt with in these standards. Now, here defining the fraud and its character is very important. We have a popular concept called as the fraud triangle, which goes into motivation, opportunity, and rationalization. That triangle plays an important role. The triangle plays an important role to understand the mindset of the fraudster and to look at where did the fraud emerge from, where did this fraud start from. It also helps us to weave the story what we put in our report, because please understand that if there is a fraud, it implies a criminal liability on the perpetrator. Again, the quality of evidence, again, when we go to those standards, the respective faculties will be dealing that in detail. The quality of evidence has to be far greater in case of forensic assignment, thereby a detailed investigation needed. So the concept of risk applied in fraud scenario will give us fraud risk. Okay, typically risk is to be defined. The concept of fraud is to be considered while defining such risk. This will give us the fraud risk. Next, high risk and vulnerable areas of fraud should be used to prioritize, and then take this will go to the planning to design the execution processes. Fraud risk evaluation requires to establish extent of emphasis of reporting. Again, how much emphasis should be given on what part while reporting. This will also be determined through evaluation of the fraud risk. Okay, now the requirements. What are the key requirements of this standards? To prioritize and identify the fraud indicator, and we have to start with the most vulnerable areas. The most vulnerable areas, they have to be emphasized. Details on how to do that is again given in FAIS 330. Now, all frauds efforts are put in. There's statistics which says that in 88% of the cases, efforts are put in to conceal the fraud. This intentional deceit makes the job of the forensic accountant difficult. So that is why understanding the psychology of the fraudster, to know the incentive as to what is the incentive that the fraudster is having and how did the opportunity emerge, this will confirm with the determination of the fraud risk. Now, the documents which will confirm as to applying this standard is identification of a document has to be created on identification of the fraud indicator and how these fraud indicators are addressed. This can be used as confirmation to the work procedure. Friends, details of the document as to how the document will be created, what would be the format, what are the key fields, what should be covered, what should not be covered, this will be dealt with when we come up with the guidance note, which is both the operational guidance note and the technical guidance note. This will be covered when we come up with the guidance note. Next, we have law and regulations. Now, See, as the forensic assignment come out of, or as the forensic assignment, the entire genesis is fraud. So there is law and there is regulation which is imbibed in most of the assignment. Now, most of the engagement, they have either a specific law or a general law. Okay, so the professional appointment can be either in accordance with a specific law or regulations, law of regulations, or with contractual arrangement with the client. So the appointment may come out of a specific law which is there for timing in force. So something like the transaction audit which is there in the insolvency and bankruptcy code, or it may come out of a simple contractual appointment from the client and the professional. So the objective is that entire engagement is to be executed and conducted as per the given mandate. Okay, entire engagement are to be conducted and executed as per the given mandate. A thorough process-driven approach has to be followed, and the approach is to identify and report violation of law, contractual terms, which are in sync with the objectives of the engagement. Now, if again we'll see that if the appointment is under a specific law, the engagement should be in line with such law. So if certain terminology is not used in a particular law, then the professional should ensure that he does not use such terminology. For contractual assignments, the engagement should not be contrary to any law, because there's no specific law mentioned in that particular contract. Okay, if there is some complex issue, say like valuation of a liquid inventory, such complex issue should be dealt with help of an expert. Principle of natural justice has to be kept in mind while drafting the report. Friends, please understand, this being a report of a dispute, principle of natural justice plays a key role to add to authenticity and impartiality of the investigation. So the view and perspective of the other side, when I say other side, it can be the affected side. Probably it may not be imbibed in the mandate. So then in that case, you have to modify the mandate and include that. So to demonstrate impartiality in the report and in the conduct, this principle of natural justice has to be incorporated in the report. Okay. Now, friends, the laws which are applicable, we have the standard classifies the laws into two parts. One is the direct impact laws, and second is the engagement specific law. Okay, direct impact law and engagement specific law. Now, what are direct impact law? So certain laws which are specifically applicable to all types of assignments, all types of engagement. Such provisions are applicable to all FAI engagement, and basic knowledge of these is expected. Say for an example, if we look at the Evidence Act, irrespective of the nature of the engagement, the provisions of Evidence Act will be applicable to all types of assignment. So this can be covered under the direct impact law. Whereas if we look at engagement specific law, then probably the engagement may stem out of certain specific law. So if we are looking at an incidence reporting and a data theft, then the engagement specific law which comes into play is the Information and Technology Act. So certain engagement emerge out of specific laws. In addition to direct impact law, engagement specific law will become cornerstone of such assignment. And what are the documents that will demonstrate confirmation to work procedure? A detailed checklist Now, this detailed checklist has to be based on the specific law. This detailed checklist has to be based on the specific law. So, detailed checklist, chain of custody document. Mind you, the moment we start dealing with evidence, chain of custody becomes a pivotal element. That is, who is holding the evidence. So, chain of custody documents and deviations to specific law, the documentation of deviations to specific law, all this will form part of the confirmation to work procedures. Next, the last standard which I am dealing with, the last standard will be application of hypothesis. Now, friends, we as chartered accountants may not be very well versed with the concept of hypothesis, but it's a very small standard, but definitely a key one. A hypothesis is assumed theory which needs to be proven or rejected. It's a well-researched principle. The concept of hypothesis is well-researched principle. It is mostly used in researches. So, because we really don't know which side the assignment will fall upon, so we start the assignment with certain assumptions and with certain presumptions. These assumptions and presumptions, these have to be written in a scientific manner in form of a statement, and this hypothesis, ultimately your conclusion will be either the hypothesis will be accepted or the hypothesis will be rejected. Okay, so this designing of hypothesis is generally being done by the senior most team member, because this is the heart of the assignment. Around this, all the work procedure and the execution is dependent. So if the hypothesis is faulty, then the entire investigation will land nowhere. Now, it is differently applied in case of forensic accounting and in case of investigation. It's totally situation dependent. However, in case of forensic accounting, the principles of account play a important role. Now, the purpose of having a hypothesis, the entire purpose of having a hypothesis is to have a methodical way of discovery of evidence. It's not a haphazard activity that you start with something, you end up with something, but it follows a procedural and methodical way. This hypothesis is the benchmark as to how you will execute the assignment, and it tests the evidence at every step. It tests the evidence at every step, whether the hypothesis is proved, disproved, or not proved. Okay. Now, while development of the hypothesis, it is to be ensured that neutrality, that one is neutral by while developing the hypothesis. It should not be clouding. It should not be clouding the beliefs. My beliefs and assumptions should not be clouding my development of hypothesis. Otherwise, neutrality is hampered and it becomes a biased approach. Again, hypothesis should be flexible. So the hypothesis should keep on evolving, because such engagements are dynamic. You start with a point that the alleged person is person X. However, during the course of assignment, you may come up with a theory that person X is nowhere related to this. He does not have the authority or power level to execute such kind of work. So the hypothesis has to be flexible and it should keep on evolving. And evidence discovery has to be centered around the hypothesis as to whether this evidence proves, disproves, or does not proves the formulated theory. Document demonstrating this is application and testing of hypothesis documents. Such documents which are created for formulation, application, and testing of hypothesis. Such documentation should be kept in our file, should be kept on record as confirmation to the work procedures. Okay, so with this short discussion, friends, I have discussed my part of the session. I hope it was quick, fast view, but I hope you have got to understand the basics of the document. Thank you so much for the entire team for reposing so much faith in us. And indeed, it's a matter of pride and privilege for us to be part of this. Thank you so much. I would request the next faculty. I suppose we have Satish sir with us. He can take over, or Harish ji, as it may be, as it may go.
Yes, no, I request Satish to take over directly. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So, good morning, everybody. And thank you for this opportunity. Durgesh, you, as usual and as expected, you did a fantastic job.
Thank you, sir.
So wonderful. Great to be here, first of all. Lot of traction on these forensic standards have already been generated, and lot more expected as well. Taking this opportunity to also invite lots of people in the participants to really take part in the formulation of these, the remaining part of the documentation. There is so much work that needs to be done in the CA Institute, and all kinds of help is solicited. It's a good opportunity to get involved, and it's a great feeling, mind you, when these standards see the light of the day. Kudos and acknowledgement to the entire team. I was very proud to lend my small contribution to this, and there are over 800 participants, as Harish is saying, is mentioning. So it's a wonderful number, and I implore each one of you to participate. It's not a part-time contribution. I mean, it's not that you're just going to be there for some portions of the document, but it involves a lot of passion and commitment. And I think this has been very, very well displayed by all the members of the study group, and just too good support by all the council members, central council members, who have really empowered Harish Dua. We also had a good leader in Harish, because he was able to get the best out of each one of us. So much for the making of the standards, and let me come down to what I have been really given. So I'll be taking the set of standards of 200, and as we have already said, but for the sake of repetition, let me tell you that this is a very, very top level view of the standards. We'll be definitely taking more seminars, more webinars on this subject. So please take note that this is only a top level display of the entire standards. I will not be having slides, because I proposed to cover this in about 20 minutes, and I thought that the slides might not be necessary. I'll be taking the 200 standards. For the first one is 210, which is the engagement objectives. Okay. There is a little distinction to be made between an engagement and an assignment. This will be covered in the subsequent standards, but at this stage, I need to clarify very correctly that the engagement is the larger piece of the work that comes, and assignments are specific assignments that and there could be one or more assignments that can come up once the engagement starts. So there will be an assignment. From the assignment, there could be some more assignments that will come up, but the engagement is the overarching first set of document that is required. So the engagement objectives, what I plan to do is I'll be talking about the scope, the objectives, the documentation, and the requirements. So this will be the 4 broad heads under which I'll be talking for each of the standards. Maybe take about 5 minutes per standard, and that should help. I thought would help us through. So the engagement objectives, the first thing is the scope, which is to clearly set the responsibilities and objectives of the various engagements or the various assignments that will follow. What is essential is that the responsibilities is clearly set out right at the beginning. I know it's some of us may say that how do I know before actually getting into the assignment? How do I know how do I clearly set it up? But we must do preliminary work enough for us to for us to reach this particular position. Let's come down to the objectives. There must be a clarity on the primary purpose of the engagement. Just as Durgesh was saying here until now, that we must have, what is the assignment all about? Why has this assignment really come about? Is the scope consistent with the objectives? Is it clearly defined and agreed? And that is the kind of clarity that we require at the start of the assignment. Well begun is half done, as they say, and it is very, very critical in a forensic assignment. Many things are opaque, many things are in shades of gray, no doubt about it, in forensic investigations as compared to probably internal audit assignments. But the purpose is that we must be as clearly, we should be able to be in a position to as clearly define the assignment as possible. It's also important that we get an agreement very clearly. And of course, there is one more standard on communication with the stakeholders, to which I'll come to at the last part of the communication. And then the expected outcomes and its nature is clearly and very clearly discussed with the stakeholders. Expected outcomes means it doesn't mean that expected outcome means we are going to sack this particular employee, or we are going to, that is not the meaning. But what exactly is the result, or what exactly is the specific problem that has arisen, which has resulted in this engagement, has to be clearly defined at the beginning. What about documentation? We need to document all that has gone into before really coming out with the engagement letter. The initial correspondence, the minutes of meetings, and any other communication that is done with the person engaging the forensic investigator needs to be very, very specifically documented. And I mind you, these documents will become very critical subsequent to issuance of the report, where we may also be called as expert witnesses as well. So we must document any other amendments to the objectives, any scope change, and any limitations that might arise during the assignment or during the engagement. If there is any change after we start the engagement, if there is any change or any amendment that is required in the objectives, or some more information, as Durgesh was talking about, that there may be some occasions where we may have to change the scope. And this happens in projects also, right? When any company takes a project, there is a certain scope that is defined. But as we move along in the assignment, we do realize that there is a lot of chances, there are chances that the scope is changed, and we must be very mindful of that. The requirements is that we must understand and document the main purpose of the engagement. We must understand this very, very clearly. We must agree on it, and we must document it. We must make sure that we are very clear on what is getting included and what is not getting included. And these exclusions especially must be very, very clearly spelled out in the scope document. The expected outcomes is in line with the objectives and defined scope. That's what we need to ensure when we are defining what the engagement objectives are. And the engagement is not designed to commit any particular outcome, since it's dependent on facts and evidences. This is, I think, the most critical line. All the outcomes must be very clearly linked to the evidences that are getting produced. There's a separate standard on evidences, which my other colleague will be taking it. But while we're making the engagement objectives, there should not be any commitment on the specific outcome. But it must be because it is completely dependent on the facts and the evidences that one will be really bringing about. Let's move now on to FAIS 220, which is on engagement acceptance and appointment. I'll here again take it in 4 parts. That is the scope, objectives, documentation, and requirements. So the engagement, acceptance, and appointment. So what is the scope? Agreeing to the terms of engagement considering the degree of sensitivity and inherent risk. All assignments have an inherent risk, no doubt about it. All assignments, be it forensic, be it internal audit, or what have you, all of them do come with this kind of sensitivity and inherent risk. Why is this getting called out very specifically in the forensic investigation is that the degree of the sensitivity and the inherent risk are far, far higher than what it probably would come in an internal audit assignment. So there must be a very clear agreement on the terms of engagement in this engagement letter. What are the objectives? Preliminary and due diligence procedures are undertaken to evaluate conditions of appointment prior to acceptance. There must be a preliminary and a due diligence procedure. Just as when there are mergers and acquisitions, just as when there are some valuations to be done, there is always a DD that is done. So similarly, there must be depending on the assignment, because each assignment, unlike if I can say so, unlike an audit, in each assignment of a forensic assignment has its own nuances, is a very specific case-to-case kind of a basis. So therefore, this due diligence procedure becomes pretty important. The key terms are agreed with the client and documented in a very formal engagement letter. Is there a form for the formal engagement letter? The answer is no. But whatever form that you use, whatever wordings that we use, we must make sure that the key terms are very, very clearly documented. And as I said earlier, but for the sake of repetition, let me say this again, the inclusions and exclusions must be clearly documented. The draft, coming to the documentation, the draft engagement letter, and we must be there and obtain written consent of the appointing stakeholders. A written consent is something that has to be there. It's a mandate. Otherwise, the standard says that it is not. It's not on. You can't start an assignment unless we have a formal written appointment letter. What are the requirements? Preliminary procedure to be conducted to understand the nature and complexity of the engagement and to assess ability to undertake engagement in compliance with basic principles. What is important to be known is what should be the composition of my team. Will I require some specific expert? Do I require expertise in a specific area? Unless and until I have that expertise, I should not really be treading on these waters. Therefore, this preliminary checks, preliminary procedures that is there, through that we are in a position to understand the nature and the complexity of the engagement. Because as I said earlier, each engagement is a separate engagement. We must conduct the due diligence to assess inherent risk and understand the use of outcomes by the stakeholders. What is the ultimate use of the outcome of the investigation by the stakeholders should be pretty much known. Ensure that the expected outcomes is in line with the objectives and defined scope. That means the expected outcome should be in line with the objectives and the defined scope, which means it gives a lot more importance that the objectives of the assignment is very, very clearly known, clearly documented, and most importantly, clearly agreed. There must not be any ambiguity on this sphere. Let's move on to the important one, which is the FAIS 230, using the work of an expert. This term is not new for all of us. We've known this in the past. We've used this in the past. At what circumstances we really require to have an expert in the team, and the typical clause of an agency applies that if you appoint an agent to do something, you are equally responsible to the agency that appointed you in full measure. And therefore, whenever there is an expert that some job is given to, all that, whatever job, whatever manner, whatever fashion that person executes, or that person, firm, or whatever executes that assignment, that it is onerous on our part as far as our obligation with our engagement. So the scope, objectives, documentation, requirements. These are the 4 parts in which I'll take this talk about this standard. The engagement, using expert to assist in engagement and place reliance on the work of the expert. That's the scope. That means under what circumstances we will use an expert, how much reliance we will place on the work of an expert while forming our own opinion or the final outcome. The objectives is that professional sourcing technical assistance in case of absence of necessary skills and expertise. I think that's the basic line. That whatever skills and expertise we don't have in our own firm or in our own, at our own beck and call, those things we need to get it done through an expert. Procedures conducted in complex areas meet quality requirements. These are at many times this investigation would require a little complex area that will come up. And we must have procedures in place to ensure that the complex, that these things are taken care of and done with the quality completely in mind. So let me quickly get back. I was talking about the requirements using work of an expert. The professional shall also make independent assessment of expert for nature and significance of the matter, technicality and complexity of the subject matter, understanding fraud risk and vulnerability, and comparison of expertise required. Sum and total of this long sentence is that we must have clear sight of what the expert is going to help us to do. We must seek authority to appoint expert because we must ensure that we have the authority. So we have to get the qualifications and the credentials of the expert and define the scope, make sure that that is there. If I have to talk about engaging, the next standard is on FAIS 240, engaging with agencies. Here again, I talk about the scope, objectives, documentation, and requirements. The scope is, this is the engaging with the agencies. This is to cover engagements where professional is appointed by agency or a consultant or advisor and also called upon the agency to assist. It does not apply in situations where the professional provides expert witness services in any proceeding before a court of law. What are the objectives? You have to define certain protocols, legal aspects to be followed while undertaking engagements. We must clarify the roles.
Okay, Satish, no worries. I'll finish off your piece and then we'll move on to Murli. Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks, Satish. Really appreciate it. Bye now. Okay, friends, just give me a moment. I'll just move on to. So Satish was talking about 240, engaging with agencies. Are you able to see my screen? Amit, please confirm.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, the provisions here are making sure that that we have agreed the objectives, the scope, and procedures with the agencies, because agencies seems to have, their own unique requirements. They're not straightforward as a client relationship that we normally see in the corporate world. These agencies generally have very legally driven. So it's very important to set that out. And that is why the laws and regulations play a big role in this whole area. And the respective agencies and how the laws in those, for example, if you're doing a IBC kind of an arrangement, then you have to be very familiar with the, the code and the laws that apply there. Thirdly, the requirement is that certain basic principles that I discussed earlier regarding independence, objective, integrity, confidential, they play a very heavy role in this area. And we need to place special emphasis in this. Fourthly, the roles and responsibilities in how the facts get presented to the agencies is very important. For example, law takes precedence over anything in terms of the contracts that we may have or in terms of the arrangements that we may have. So if the law says that this is the manner in which the report will be issued, so on and so forth, those roles and responsibilities of the professional is very important, and the laws take precedence. Finally, it's about the due professional care with regard to how we communicate with agencies, and that's very important. So these are some of the things that get defined in this standard that we need to take care of. The other standard that was going to be covered by Satish is 250 on communication with stakeholders. Here, basically, the standards clearly defines who the stakeholders are and how do we communicate with them. The stakeholders have actually been split into two categories: a primary stakeholder, which is basically nothing but the appointing authority. So if there's a chairman of the board of directors, then he's the primary stakeholder, or it could be one of the agencies, for example, or the court of law. They would be the primary stakeholders in this situation. And then any of the other stakeholders are basically categorized separately. Reason is because the communication with one versus the other has to be in very clear and distinct terms. And the responsibilities, the standard basically spells out the responsibility of the professional to communicate directly with the primary stakeholders. And that is what the provisions are. They talk about the professional having a laid down process and a predefined agreed protocol on who's going to communicate with whom, at what point in time, and with what are the nature of the matters that need to be communicated at what point in time. So this protocol has to be laid out right away prior to starting the engagement. Standard places a lot of emphasis on that. Secondly, the communication with the other stakeholders is also has its role to play, and there the process and the protocol also need to be defined. So it's actually one protocol where the communication with both the stakeholders is clearly defined. And the communication shall be clear, direct, independent, objective, and effective. Fundamentals of any communication, basically. Now, the form and content of matters to be communicated is, of course, left to the best judgment of the professional. And the time frame in which those communication will have to happen is, again, like I mentioned earlier, as part of the protocol. But here, the professional has to apply its best judgment. Nevertheless, the standard lays out certain things called essential matters. And these are matters that need to be communicated as per the requirement of the standard. And there's also something called significant matters. These two, essential matters and significant matters, there's a indicative list given. I think it's probably on the next sheet. Yeah. So, for example, the essential matters are things which help with the engagement's proper execution. They go into the scope and methodology, the process and protocol of communication, the laws and regulations that are applicable. These all things need to be communicated directly with the primary stakeholders. The support and cooperation that you need, the fees and the resourcing constraints, the reporting requirements, and as the engagement progresses, and the formats of reporting if they are spelled out. Now, significant matters, on the other hand, are general communication requirements, but they deal more with making sure that the engagement gets executed, the engagement issues that come up get addressed in a very timely and effective manner. For example, if the professional is not getting the cooperation which is causing delays, then that needs to be discussed immediately through the proper channels of communication. If the information that is required is getting withheld, if there is intimidation by certain stakeholders on the professional, or if the professional comes up with some sort of a conflict of interest that emerges from the work that is being carried out, and he realizes that basic principles are at stake, that needs to be communicated. Or if he notices issues that are coming up that is going to impact his report, such as destruction of evidence or a breakdown in the chain of custody, or even life-threatening situations. So these are certain significant matters that need to be communicated. And this is the requirement of the standard 250. Okay, so that's all. I needed to cover to complete Satish's presentation. I now stop the share screen and I request Murliji to take over and cover his piece in which he plans to discuss the 300 series standards, 310, 320 and 330, the three standards. Murliji, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Harish. Thank you, everyone who is organizing this overview session. It's my pleasure to be a part of it. In addition to having been part of the whole exercise of having conceived and delivered these standards with a lot of exercise and effort and satisfaction. I'll be primarily dealing with standard 310 on planning the assignment, 320 on evidence and documentation, and 330 on executing the work. These standards, when you look at them, you would find that there's a lot of interplay between all these standards. I'm sure Satish and others who have spoken ahead of me would have told you that no standard in this set of standards, or for that matter, any standards, given the framework under which they're framed, should be dealt with in isolation. Every standard has very strong interplay with the other standards, and that's something that we have to keep in mind. Having said that, I would say that there's no other standard which is representative of all the other standards than the standard of planning. Planning, as chartered accountants, we are all extremely familiar with the process of planning, and the success of any work depends to a large extent on the way it is planned. So that, we are prepared, well prepared for it. We know how to go about it, how to encounter any issues or roadblocks along the way, and at the same time overcome them and then change the course and reach the objective. There is an age-old saying which says, well begun is half done, and there's no better way to begin an assignment, especially in the forensic area, than to plan it well. Planning primarily is done with the purpose of laying down the processes that we would like to apply in execution of the work, in fact, in implementing whatever we need to do in the course of achieving the objectives of the assignment that we are engaged in. It deals with every single standard that's been dealt with so far, and also the standards that would be dealt with after I finish my presentation. So that's what planning is all about. And having said that, we are all familiar as chartered accountants with the planning process. I would like to add also that this is distinct from the planning that we are used to in the case of other engagements. It's very, very important to remember and realize that forensic engagements are always, we are always treading on a very unpredictable path. As Satish was saying, there are many more shades of gray than we can identify and realize, and we have to be prepared for it, and that's what's very, very crucial for the planning process. And the essentials of the planning process have been spelled out in the standard, include identification of the real requirements of the engagement, the assignment. Unlike the other engagements that we are used to, like the audits, where we have a clear understanding of what can be expected, what needs to be looked into. In the case of the forensic engagement, we should also remember that no two assignments are alike. Every assignment is unique by itself, and that makes it all the more essential that we plan the assignment with a very clear understanding of what the requirements are, what are the expectations, what are the deliverables, how do we meet the expectations and match the deliverables with the expectations, and what is required in the course of that, be it the advice of an expert, the involvement of an expert, the assessment of the risk, all those things. They could be, they might be necessary in certain instances, in some other instances they may not be necessary, but please understand and please convince yourselves with absolute clarity that these three standards are mandatory without exception, and they will have to occur, they will have to be implemented, they will have to be executed with due caution and diligence to really achieve the success at the end of the whole assignment, and to the satisfaction of not only the clients but also for ourselves, and to also withstand any question before the court of law. Now, what are the three elements required to achieve the objectives? Knowledge of the issues at hand. I wouldn't let you confuse it with the knowledge of business that we talk about in the course of planning for audits and other things. Then the risk consideration. These are not just the risks that are involved in the course of the fraud investigation engagement, but also the other associated risks even after completion of the work. What are the real risks that could have led to the fraud? What are the risks that you would be faced as an investigator at the end of the whole exercise until you complete it and after you complete it also? There could be many kinds of risks. Those would be brought out with the education material that the institute is proposing to bring out, and you will get a fairly illustrative list of such things. Then discussions with the stakeholders. This is very, very important because unless there is an ongoing communication between the stakeholders and the forensic accountant, it's not possible for him to have the kind of clarity that would be expected of him to be able to deliver to the expectations. And unless we deliver, unless we have a very absolute clarity on what we can promise to the stakeholders, we would not be able to deliver in such a way as to synchronize our deliveries with the expectations. So these communications are not necessarily limited to a one-time upfront discussion, but something that would be required on an ongoing process. We have also experienced these matters in the course of our other engagements as chartered accountants. Then the other important thing, most important thing is resource allocation. It's very, very essential that we deploy the right kind of competent resources, because these are very strictly time-bound and time is the essence of these engagements and the assignments. And so we have to be very sure that the resources we deploy are well prepared, they're well briefed, they're well monitored, they're good at execution, and the work executed is quickly reviewed, and it's capable of being documented and presented within the time frame that's allowed to us during the course of the engagement. The last thing, though not the least important, is technology deployment. It's very, very important that we understand where we can deploy technology so that we can focus on the critical aspects of our intellectual approach to the whole assignment and leave the routine or the analytical part of it to more to the technology that's available today at our disposal, fortunately, to make a clear assessment of it and move on. Then it's also, if necessary, we should not hesitate to communicate the progress of the work with the stakeholders from time to time. And that's again, this is a part of the execution. Before I would skip 320, the standard on evidence and documentation, move on to execution, and then come back to evidence and documentation then. The conducting the work procedures is something that you would be directly connecting with the standard on planning. Planning is all focused on how to execute, when to execute what, in what sequence, and the objective behind each task, what is discoverable, and how that discoverable should be sequentially carried on to the next task, and how there should be, I would say, an effective cooperation and collaboration between the various resources that we deploy, when to bring them into the onto the stage, and then what to do with them, and how to put the whole mosaic together so that the ultimate objectives and the way that the work has been executed would be very clearly defined, and it would be capable of being documented in such a way that would be justifying the work that's been done, and it would also stand the forensic professional in good stead when he is asked to clarify and justify the work that he has done. So as I said, the execution is again something that will be unique in each assignment. The focus should be, of course, on the scope, the terms of the engagement, the terms of the agreement, where I know it's very, very critical that these things should be kept in mind all through, so that you will not only be focused, you will be able to achieve the objectives more effectively, and you will be also be able to bring greater evidence in support of the conclusions that you will be arriving and reporting as a forensic investigation professional. Then deploying the relevant tools, techniques, because all those things are also laid down in the standard. Then the very important thing that we have to keep in mind during the course of the execution of the work is testing the hypothesis. Durgesh Pandey had just shared his expert views on what hypotheses are and what needs to be done with the hypotheses to start with, to test them, to accept those hypotheses, to prove them correct or to prove them wrong, or to discard those hypotheses. So what this means is, as you test a hypothesis, there could be other evidences that could come to light. The hypothesis could be proved right, could be proved wrong, or it could be proved irrelevant to the context. So in which case, you need to develop a new hypothesis, which means you need to go back to the plan and also change the plan. So that brings me to say that the planning process is not something that starts before the execution of the work and stops when you begin the execution, but it's something that goes all through the process. The execution as well as the planning go hand in hand, and this has to be kept in mind, and it cannot be believed, or it cannot be a limiting factor that once you plan something, that's the only way you go forward. Planning will continuously change. As I said, they run parallel to execution and planning, work parallel to each other, and we need to make sure that the parallel relationship between them continues till the very end, so that you can validate the planning, you can validate the execution, and make sure that everything has gone according to a plan. So that is the modification that's required, and then we need to keep in mind that even in this process, it's very, very important that everything that's done has to be done, as I said, with proper understanding of what is the objective, how it's being done as per the plan, how the resources are being allocated, and then any questions and issues that one encounters along the way are duly addressed, and that these issues, as and when it's appropriate, they are definitely communicated with the stakeholders, particularly the client, the person who is engaging the forensic professional, so that they should also be constantly in touch with us and be kept up abreast with what's happening. And they should also be made ongoing stakeholders, not stakeholders who are limited to appointing us and receiving our report, but people who are continuously aware of what's happening, so that any expectation that could be communicated to us in terms of the change in the expectation could also be incorporated into the change in the planning process, and we could go ahead and incorporate it into the execution also. Now, documentation. When it comes to documentation, the essence of any documentation that's compiled by a professional and submitted for a review or a test of its validity is that it should be capable of standing by itself when it is reviewed by an independent and competent professional to review it and present, and the person who is reviewing it or who is relying it should be capable of coming to the same conclusions that a forensic engagement professional would have come to without even having to refer to him or discuss it. So it should be capable of supporting itself independently in terms of justifying and validating the conclusions that a professional would have expressed. So that's what documentation is all about, whether in forensic engagements or any other professional engagements that anybody engages in. So the essential things, of course, again, we are familiar with the documentation, is that they should be relevant to the context, all the more so in forensic engagements, and they should also be sufficient. They should not be lacking in any perspective, angle, or information or details that you would like to attach, based on which you would be referring to the report. So that's very, very important. And we should also keep in mind that this documentation would always be put to test. The standing risk, the backdrop against which we work as forensic engagement professionals, is that these would be tested more often than not, by a regulator, by an investigating agency, by someone who is not necessarily a professional like we are. So that's something that has to be kept in mind, and the documentation has to be very thoroughly and meticulously and sequentially and very highly professionally prepared related to the report, and it has to be reviewed by somebody, and only then the report should be submitted with an absolute conviction that it would stand any test before the law, before any regulator or any other investigator. So, as I said, my concluding sentence would be that these standards, these are three standards that one will have to go through, apply and comply with without exception, regardless of what the forensic engagement is. And so they have a very, very critical role, not just a crucial role, but a very critical role in the forensic engagement, and they deserve a lot of attention, of course, like all the other standards also. But these would be like the heart, the face, and the whole the nervous system that runs through the whole process. Thanks for this opportunity. I thank the Institute and the organizers for this. It was a pleasure sharing my thoughts with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Murli. Really appreciate all your help and decent presentation. We now move on to Uday. Udayji, you're ready?
Yes, sir, very much.
Great. May I request you to please carry it forward, the remaining 300 series, three of them that you're covering, 340, 350, 360. Go ahead, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon, all the participants. I hope the PPTs are visible and my voice is clear to you. So first of all, before starting the long-awaiting dream, that is the organized body of the knowledge in the form of the forensic accounting and the investigation standard, that has now become the reality. And for that, thanks to the ICAI, thanks to Manuji, Dayaji and Harishji, who has taken hard efforts to reach the goal ultimately and to post the goal in this total travel, as we have doing it for last couple of months. So now coming to my agenda, what is there in the agenda? If you see, there are 4 standards which I'm going to discuss. 340, it's related to the conducting the interviews. 350, revision and supervision, and 360, testifying before the competent authorities. I'm also going to discuss 430, but I hope first in the first 15 minutes, I will discuss these 340, 350 and 360. And 430, which is the specialized kind of a standard. So I hope that will be covered within a gap of 10 minutes. So if you look at the 350, 340, 350 and 360, all of these are the part of the execution of the assignments, and continuing with what the Murliji has just left, starting from the planning and the documentation part. The next thing which is important in the execution is the conducting of the interviews. The one of the important part of all these standards is with the various types of the definitions related to the various concepts, because many of the times when the stakeholders are going through the standards, they may wanted to know what is the explanation, how they can interpret about various concepts that has been used in the standards. Of course, there is an explanatory paragraph. I hope that might have been already discussed by the Harishji. But that's how we have structured it. And the important part we are coming up as like a definition. So here in this 340, which is related to the interview, I hope everybody can understand the importance of the interview while executing this forensic accounting and the investigations kind of an assignments. It's a very tricky job. It requires a specialized skill. But basically, we have come out in the standards with the definition, what is interview is all about. So we are calling it as a structured meeting. Interview is a structured meeting to elicit the information, to extract the information. And of course, what is the purpose of that? So that we can collect the information to corroborate whatever be the facts or whatever be the allegations are there. And we are finding, we may be able to find the gaps or the red flags through that interview. And most importantly, we need to plan this interview. That is also part of the definition. On the fly, sometimes it may be required to conduct some questions with the stakeholders, but mostly interview per se needs to be planned. And when we say we are conducting the structured meeting as an interview, there are certain legal provisions, there are certain legal protocols which also needs to be followed. Basically, if you see the attributes related to the principles which are there related to the execution of the assignments, like the principle of natural justice and giving the opportunity to the others to express their thoughts. So all these things as a part of the legal provisions needs to be added. one important part of this legal provisions is that if we are planning to use this interview as an evidence, then there are certain provisions which are there in the Indian Evidence Act too. So we should be aware about that. And the forensic professional who is conducting this interview, they should be at least having primary knowledge of those provisions so that their interview could be fruitful and will be helpful to achieve the objectives of the assignments. For that purpose, when we say this needs to be properly planned, for that purpose, as Murliji has rightly said, understanding the case is very, very important. So we should understand the case, and we have to prepare properly, appropriately, what type of questions, what methodology we are going to adopt, and to whom we are going to interview. I mean, how many persons which are related into that particular dispute-related matters, to whom we are going to ask certain questions. That due preparation is required. We may require to inform to our appointing agency that the interview of these persons may be required. Sometimes the questionnaire which we are going to ask them, the questions which we are going to ask them, that also needs to be planned, because as I said, it is a skill. Where is the skill in this interview is the how you are putting the questions to the person with whom you are taking the interview, because it is not only the direct questions which will give you the answer, and there needs to be some tricks, there needs to be some skill. I hope because of the time restriction I am not able to fully explore all these things, but the specific skill is required for plotting the questions, and हमें क्या information निकलवानी है, that kind of things we have to define, and for that purpose the methodology is also required. So when we say the due preparation related to the disputed matter, by understanding the disputed matter, coming up with the methodology and skillfully planning the question, that is also an important area in this interview aspect, and that has brought in standard. Another important part which is there in the standards, in some cases there is a possibility that interviews may not be required. If it is so, then it should be come out with the scope area of that assignment or the engagement, and the same thing needs to be brought forward in our final report also, that because of the restriction or because of the scope is like that, we are not able to conduct the interview, and what could have been its impact on the total assignment, that also needs to be brought out through our report. Another thing, sometimes we may require, when we say the methodology is required, because sometimes it is also possible in this disputed matter that we need to conduct interviews along with the investigating agencies. So we will be there in their questionnaire, with their questionnaire. So suppose the CBI or the police, they wanted to take interview or the investigation or interrogation of certain person, they may ask you to join in their putting up the questions. So that is also needs to be kept in mind. The last point which has brought out in this standard is the professional shall maintain the confidentiality of the content and the outcome of this interview. Now there will be some question in your mind why this standard is saying so, because first thing, if it is legally necessary or if it is a legal mandate to disclose what is the outcome of the interview, the standard is not stopping, but whenever there is a disclosure is required to other stakeholders other than the legal person, then there could be certain issues that there could be the tampering of the evidence is kind of an issue. So possibly the outcome of this interview should not be disclosed unless and until it is legally mandated. So these are the core and the essential part which is brought out by this standard related to the conducting of the interviews. The next standard, which is related to the revision and supervision. So revision and supervision, of course, this is a teamwork. That's why Murliji has said that the proper planning and planning does not begin at the beginning of the assignment, but it is a continuous process. Why it is continuously he is calling upon, and he has rightly said that the standards are interrelated. So review and supervision is also interrelated with that planning kind of things. And again, as I said in the earlier discussion, the standards are brought some of the important definitions. So here also we have brought what is exactly the review is, what is exactly the supervision is. So review we have defined as it is an examination of our planning, of our work procedure, whatever the documentation we are collecting as an evidence is. whether these are the evidences which can be able to be submitted in the court of law, whether we are able to draw the conclusion related to that assignment, related to that disputed matter, that is covered as a review. And what is covered as a supervision? Supervision is activities related to our team performance. So our team may require the guidance basically because their efforts should be directed towards the achievement of the objective. So the most important part of this supervision is the guidance from ourselves so that they will be target their efforts to achieve the assignment's objective. That is, we have defined as in supervision. Now, as a part of the requirements of a revision and supervision, now exactly when we are saying that there is a standard related to the revision and the supervision, what the professional needs to do in this revision and supervision, what activities the professional shall expected from the professional in relation to this revision and supervision. And in all these standards, I hope again that might have been already discussed, in all these standards, the documentation, so that will be demonstrate the compliance of all these standards, that has been also mentioned. For the activities related to the supervision, revision and supervision is concerned, that is also brought out as a requirement part in this 350 standard. So basically the activities to ensure the evidences which we are gathering, those activities are performed effectively. So the directions of our all the team members, they have understood the subject matter and we have specified what kind of an evidences are required, and accordingly their efforts are targeted. That is the first area which needs to be ensured in this revision. The second thing which is required, because all the members may or may not be aware about the legal and regulatory framework, but the engagement professional, he must be aware about the legal and regulatory framework because this is all about the evidences gathering. And as I said, the core act which is dealt with all this forensic assignment is the Evidence Act. And also when we are collecting various types of the information in the form of the evidences, let us say that we are downloading certain things from the certain websites. So whether it will be provided as an evidences or not. So what are the laws says about that? What is the legal or the regulatory framework talks about that kind of an evidences? So knowledge of that needs to be passed on to our team also. So we have to ensure whatever the documentation, whatever the evidences they are collected, they can be mapped within this legal and regulatory framework. And ultimately, all these efforts needs to be targeted towards the achievement of the assignment's objectives. Then another part which is required for this revision and supervision is the monitoring the progress of the assignment, because these assignments are the time-bound assignments, and effectively we have to perform, because effectively why I'm saying so, because the effectiveness dealt with the collection of the impactful evidences, and that too in the limited time limits or whatever the time frame has been given to us, within that we have to achieve this. So monitoring the progress could be a regular activity in this scenario. There could be table surprises. While we are dealing with these assignments, there could be table surprises. Some new facts, some new allegations, some new area of disputed matters may come in front of us, and that might not have been covered in the earlier scope, or that might have been not told to you when the discussions would be there at the beginning of the assignment, and that could not also be the objectives. It may be possible. So these kind of table surprises may come into the picture that we are calling is a change in the circumstances. And as Harij has rightly said, because in these circumstances, if this kind of table surprises may visit in our assignment, then communication to the stakeholder is important, but our planning is also needs to be revisited for that matter. So changes in circumstances needs to be assumed, and accordingly we should be ready to revisit our plan, revisit our work procedures, and accordingly the communication with the stakeholders is also required. Evidences are gathered adequate and relevant. That is the ultimate test. The success of the assignment depends on that the test of whatever the evidences we are gathering, whether those are the adequate ones, whether they are the relevant ones, because again, these are the some legal provisions which we have to consider. Periodicity. Now, in case of this assignment or the engagement, it may be possible that after how much time gap the revision and supervision needs to be done by the professional. Of course, this is a professional matter where the professional judgment needs to be applied. If it is a sensitive matter, then I think the time period could be very short, and you will have to do this kind of an assignment on a regular basis, most probably on a day-to-day basis also. That needs to be considered. Consideration of important matters or the key matters of the assignments, because when we say that we have to conduct the revision and the supervision, we need to understand that which are the key matters, which are the matters which are having the very core impact on the performance of the assignment, where we are actually targeting all our efforts to collect the evidences related to that. And those matters, the review and supervision related to those matters could be possibly the regular feature of your assignment, and that is what we have brought out through this 350 revision and supervision kind of a standard. The next part, which the standard related to the execution, is the testifying before the competent authorities. Since all these forensic assignments, it could be related to the disputes, and when there is a dispute, of course, there could be the various competent authorities which may come into the picture. It could be the police, it could be the CBI, ED, or other statutory bodies. And the forensic professional may require to appear before them because the primary work related to that professional engagement might have been done by these forensic professionals. So obviously the competent authorities may require their help, or whatever the progress which is taking place in this assignment, they would like to know from the forensic professional. So in this standard, and this is a very, very important standard, because we have to always assume that because this is a financial dispute related things, this is forensic is all about the legal proceedings. So some time or other time, the forensic professional may require to play the role before these competent authorities. So this standard has brought two important definitions, I feel. One is competent authorities and second is testimony. So in the competent authorities, the standard has defined to whom we are calling it as a competent authority. So of course, it includes the court of law, the adjudicating authorities, the enforcement agencies, the statutory bodies like the SFIO, regulatory bodies like the CB or the RBI. So all of them, we are calling it as a competent authorities. And the second part of the definition, which is covered under this standard, is the testimony. So whatever the statements the professionals are giving in front of these authorities, whether it could be oral or the written one or through the electronic form, all this could be find out as in the form of the testimony. Now, there would be certain questions like whether this testimony could be the fact testimony or the expert testimony, because there is a certain difference between this fact testimony and the expert testimony. Expert testimony, which is not defined, and the standard is not dealing with the expert testimony, but the standard is dealing with the fact witness or the fact testimony, because expert testimony, that is something needs to be appointed specifically by the court of law, and there is a separate legal provision under the Indian Evidence Act, section 45 is there, but we are not dealing with that particular kind of an expert testimony, but we are dealing with the fact testimony, which is, where whatever the investigations we have carried out, whatever the forensic work we have carried out, that needs to be presented. And for that matter, we have to face these competent authorities and what kind of an information we need to share with them. So in these standards, the standard has come out with the requirements. So when we are facing or when we have to visit the competent authorities to provide such an information, so what kind of requirements the forensic professional has to keep in mind? So first and foremost important one, again, this could be discussed in the first principles also, but when in the testimony kind of a requirement, the independent and objective approach is very, very important, because we should not be biased and there should not be any tilt towards anybody in the disputed parties. Then there should not be any conflict of interest with the disputed parties. And if that is so, that we find that we are related with any of the disputed parties and still carried out this kind of an investigation, then that kind of a relationship needs to be disclosed with these competent authorities, and that has clearly brought out by the standard. Then when we are actually providing the information to these competent authorities, what information, what could be submitted to them, what needs to be provided to them, and that is also clearly brought out with the standard. We are talking that our scope for providing this fact testimony before the competent authorities, only the facts, which is based on the evidences we have gathered. So we are not going to be biased. We are not going to be provide the information on the presumptive basis. So that is straightforwardly we have brought out with the standard. When can we do that? Right? When can we have confidence and when we can submit this kind of an information? So the engagement professional who is directly and actively involved into the assignment, because he is going from start to the end of this assignment, he will be only will have the confidence to face that kind of an inquiry from the competent authority. So we are expecting with these standards, the forensic professionals' direct and active involvement from the planning stage, from the understanding of the disputed matter up to the submission of the final report. And during this testimony kind of a requirement, every competent authorities, they go with their certain statutory or the legal rules or their protocols. So the forensic professional is also, we are expecting that they have to understand that protocols, they have to know whatever the legal framework within which these competent authorities acting, and what could be their powers, what could be their authorities, and what kind of an informations we are going to share. And within that statutory requirement, we have to provide that. So the understanding of that is very, very essential. And if we are having certain doubts about compromising the basic principles because of the changes in the circumstances, if we feel that there could be some the threat to our basic principles, then that kind of an intimation needs to be provided to the authority with whom we are sharing this information. So these are some essential matters which the standards has brought out very clearly. I think now I have covered these first three standards. I think the last standard, I think I will cover up after certain gap. So Hariji, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Udayji. I would now request Anand Jimgat to please take over the next session. We have two standards being covered by Anand, 410 and 420. Please go ahead, Anand. Thank you.
Thank you, Hariji. Good afternoon, everyone. And, let me just share my screen. Okay. So friends, welcome to the session, and I'm sure you're hearing from all the experts right now. So I have around 15 minutes, which Harish sir has given me. So I'll try to cover this whole points. There are two very interesting standards which are there, 410 and 420, which I'll be covering it out for you. Just to give you a brief, I'm sure you've heard about this. This is part of the specialized area. So 410 areas. This is all the specialized area which are coming it up, and it helps in terms of helping the other, cities executing the whole process out there. So as we all know, 410 is all about applying the data analysis. 420 is all about evidence discovery in digital domain, which as we all know is something which is becoming very important in every engagement, FAI engagement, which we are doing right now, because without that, it is not going to work at all. So without much ado, I'll just jump directly into the standard. The first one, 410, which is applying data analysis. I would say the standard is presently designed in a way that a practitioner of FAI understand the key terms. I would say the most important thing, and there was a lot of discussion, debate on that, is to bring a common terminology which can be used by all the practitioners in their approach. So the essence of the standard is all about how do I examine the data to analyze and discover patterns. It can be a kind of irregular or any kind of anomalies or inconsistent activities, which I can find out using the data or examining the data. And the second is whatever the output is coming from this DA work or data analysis work, it needs to be used to support the hypothesis, which is coming from our other main standards, the 100 and 200 series, and support all the observation which can form part of the thing. So it becomes very critical when we actually see the data. Let it be any kind of, what we call it as the fund trail or money trail when you have to see it up in any kind of cases. That data gives you a kind of a complete trail of what happened, what is this, and this can be actually a good supportings or an evidence which can be also going to the court of law. So there are some key definition which has been defined, and I'll be talking about that in the next slide. And I will be giving you why those definitions are important and what are the key things which we need to look into when we are actually interpreting those definitions. But some of the key provision which is very important and which we need to understand and appreciate as part of this standard. The first one is a term which we all have to know. This is called the data analysis plan. Now, data analysis plan, it requires a kind of a certain element or to, whatever the objective is there. It should not be like, I'm just trying, in a kind of a random way that I can do this or I will do that. There should be a proper documentation which is there on data analysis plan, which will, contain all the essential elements like data preparations, what are the data which we are doing it, how we are working it out. Because one of the things which become very important, and I'll be talking about that in the next slide, is the test of, what we call it is, can you reproduce the same activity in the DA and get the same result at a later point of time. It should not be happen that this time it has given me some other, I would say, output, and the next time I do it with the same steps, it give me some different output. It should be the test of reproducibility should be there, which I should be able to reproduce the whole things in the thing. Second part, which is there is in any kind of data analysis, or I will use the word DA, it is very important to know very clearly some of the steps which are we call as the pre-processing steps. And this has been defined also in the standard, which includes data acquisition. How do I acquire the data? Because what are the sources of data? In fact, that is also becomes very important. And there is a term which I hope many of you would have heard about, ETL, extract, transform, load. That is a standard term we use in DA. And that becomes a very important, step which has to be performed, because what sources are we using? Have we done the integrity in the whole process has to be looked into in acquiring the data, in validating the data, and preparing the data for the analysis. So all these things, comes as the pre-processing part. And at all that point, we should be aware of the data integrity and adherence to the data boundary. When I say data boundary, this is another term which is defined in the standard, which is all about ensuring that which period of data you are taking. It should not happen that we just go out and, try to see some data at a different point of time, different thing. It should be very much linked to the project, what we in hand, and it should be according to the DAP, which is the data analysis plan. The third point, which is a key provision, which is there is, whenever you're doing it, we have to have the test of reproducibility, which means if any other person follows the same steps as yours, he should also get the same result. So then only it can be accepted in the court of law, that it is like, whether I do it or you do it, if the steps are being followed clearly, then it basically means we can have all the things out there. And we have to also ensure the reporting of the, results should be done in an effective format. There are sometimes what we call it as a picture is worth 1,000 words, a dashboard or exhibits. Those are the things which can actually add it up. While ensuring that you are doing your DA, one of the things which we need to be very careful about is the confidentiality of the data, because ultimately the data which is coming to your, for your analysis, we need to maintain the confidentiality, the integrity, and it should be archived for a thing so that at any point of time we can retrieve it back and work it out. And it should be any kind of things which we are doing in this, it should be under the relevant laws or regulation which are been done. And that is one critical part which we need to look at. And also one of the other things which we have to do it, that there should be a proper expertise in the team. And we can also refer to the standard which is using the work of an expert. So whenever we don't have it, we have to actually go as per the FAIS 230, where you can actually try to use the work of an expert, expert in terms of doing it. Let me just quickly go into some of the key definitions which are there, which are very important. And as, let me just remove. So we have data source. data source has been defined, data analysis, the whole process has been defined, data preservation, and something which I've marked it as one of the most important is test of reproducibility, which basically means that it should state the data analysis run on identified data set should produce the same result in case the same tests are performed by any other competent person on the same identified data. Now, this is the crux of the standard, because that brings up a kind of things where we are, whatever we are doing, it is coming in the same manner and same steps can be followed and taken forward. And as I was telling you, one of the other part which was not clearly defined or discussed earlier was data source. Now, data source can be anything. And today we are talking about big data, where it can be internal data source also, external data source also. But how are we are doing it? What are the sources how are we accessing those? These are some of the points which we need to look into. So this is just a quick overview of, FAI 410. Let me go to the next one, which is another very interesting, which is evidence discovery in the digital domain. Now, friends, the FAI 420 is one of the standards which took a lot of time in terms of bringing multiple experts onto the same page, because there are a lot of terminology which can be interpreted in a different way. So the whole idea is to define some of the common parameters. Like, for example, there is a term which is, the essence of the standard is to talk about digital domain, because more and more businesses are moving onto the digital area, and the digital domain is very, very dynamic. It's also from a perspective of evidential matter, it is something which is there that you have a lot of evidence which is there in the digital domain. And this is something which we call as the e-discovery or electronic discovery, because the evidences are there. You need to have your processes, your approach, everything designed in a manner that we are able to get or discover this electronic evidences which are there. So some of the key definitions which we'll be seeing in the next slide is all about the definitions which is there. And especially I would highlight one of the definition which is very, which has come out very well, and it actually encompasses everything what we are, talking about, the term of digital domain. And that's something which I would say you should look up to. The key provisions which we have here from the perspective is that whenever we are maintaining or deploying a process of e-discovery, it should be properly documented. It should be as per the legal requirement. Where there are many times we take some evidences, but if it has not been sourced legally, it will not be accepted in the court of law. And also one of the things which is there, that any data source which we are trying to do it, today in the digital domain, there are data which are very, very dynamic. Let's say, for example, on social media and other things. So what is the process which we need to follow? Because it's not going to be there for a long time. So those things also become very important. So the relevant technical standard and the legal requirement has to be looked into. The second key provision, friends, which comes here is, talking about the understanding of the prevalent information system. Now that's become very important. As a FAI, I would say practitioners, you may actually get a very different environment, let it be a database which is pretty new or anything. And when we are trying to do that, we need to understand which part of the IS environment, which is, in terms of, a kind of a small part of the complete digital domain is relevant for us, for our assignment objective. It should not happen that we boil the ocean. So we need to take what is relevant and based on that only take that forward. And the third part, which becomes very important again, is the people who are conducting this or gathering this evidences, discovery and gathering of evidences, they should be knowing or they should have requisite skills or expertise or experience in working in this one. And that would actually decide on how it has been preserved, because we all know when we are doing, imaging of hard disk or any of this, storage media and everything, do you have a write protector and all the thing? Because that would decide on how we are preserving all the evidences that it is admissible as a digital evidence in the court of law. The fourth point, which is one of the very key provision again, is it's not just national laws. We have to also be, there are applicable international laws. Many times, if we are taking some evidences, it is possible that we are actually breaking maybe some European laws like GDPR or anything that on a privacy domain and all the things. So we need to be very much aware of the complying with national and international laws wherever which are applicable, and also ensuring it up, the data privacy part is there. See, even in DA as well as e-discovery, whatever data is coming to us, we have to be very, very conscious in terms of how we are using it, how we are storing it, how we are preserving it, because ultimately this is an evidence, but it is also possible that it can be misused in any other way. So we have to be, as a professionals in this domain, know very well how we are going to work on this, how we are going to use this up. And wherever required, we have to deploy the appropriate forensic tools. And now the tools and techniques are something which we'll be talking about in the definition, and I'll talk about that. We don't define these are the tools you need to use it. It all depends on the way, what are acceptable in the court of law, what are acceptable as a technology out there. And also the term which is called, a chain of custody, which is nothing but a complete audit trail of where this evidence come from, who acquired this evidence, what is the person who got it up. Everything has to be looked into. So let's deep dive quickly into some of the key definition which is there. So as I told you, the 3 key definition which I think out of the whole standard is the term digital domain, which is pretty interesting because the whole term of digital domain is nothing but the electronic environment where any digital evidence is present. That is our digital domain. And it can be in the organization, it can be in the cyberspace, which is on the internet, anywhere else out there. It can be on some social media, it can be on Twitter, anywhere you can think of. And the another term which has been defined as part of this standard is the digital evidence, which is nothing but how the data or information which is acquired, stored, assessed, and examined, transmitted, and it is used. So it's also possible the data packets which are there in the network and all things, can there be reconstructed? We can actually take as what we call it as an evidence in the court of law. And the term chain of custody, which again is something which was there, everyone is aware of that, but we try to define it up as part of this standard, is to try to see the sequential movement. I would underline this word. It's a very interesting thing. We are talking about here the sequential movement of evidence through the discovery process, which is collection, storage, securing, safeguarding, and the analysis lifecycle. The complete lifecycle which is there, and each of this step is recorded, and each person who has handled the evidences will note the date and time, getting a timestamp done on whatever that has been happening with the evidences. So this is something which are the key definition which is there. And the last slide I would like to talk about is there are 2 terms which has been explained. There are key explanatory, comments which are there. And this is on e-discovery process as well as who is a qualified expert. So e-discovery process, when we are talking about, is a laid down process which takes into account all the good practices. I want to highlight this term here, the good practices. The reason is, usually you will hear the term best practices, but what we talk about in digital forensic and this area, that what is maybe best for you may not be best for me. So there are some good practices and you need to follow those practices. There are a lot of organizations which have issued standard on this. And these practices are in the nature of identifying what are the digital data needs, what are the different sources of that, how you are connecting these digital evidences, and what are the tools which we need to deploy in that. So that's something comes as part of the e-discovery process. And the second explaining note which is there about qualified expert, this is one very important term because here, who can be an expert on that? Now, this is, a professional, the FAI professional has to use his best judgment. This is an evolving field. There are no, established, I would say, protocols on that this is an expert. There are a lot of certification which is there. So the credentials should be checked by the professional himself. And based on that, they need to have acquired this temporary technique. They don't have it in-house. They can actually get this technical expert on assignment in line with FAS 230, which I told you, using the work of an expert. So friends, these are the 2, key standard, which we call a specialized area, which has been covered. And I think due to lack of time, I'll be able to cover only this much. Thank you. Back to Harish sir.
Great. Thank you very much, Anand. Really appreciate all your inputs and your presentation. Udayji, we have one standard that we need to cover on loans or borrowings, but there are certain questions that have some questions that have come up. Would you like, should we do some Q&A now, or kind of running out of time, or can you quickly do your piece and then we'll finish the presentation before we take Q&A.
Okay, yes, certainly. So, friends,
go ahead, make your presentation on loans and borrowings, but request you to just kind of make it brief. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So, okay, so let's move towards this, the next standards, which in the specialized area, that is the loans and borrowings. In the key definition, which we have brought out from the standard, is the misutilization of the funds. Basically, this is the area which is in talk nowadays. Standard deals with the disputed transaction, of course, related to the loans and borrowings. But there is a talk about this diversification and the siphoning of the funds. But we have come out with a different kind of a definition, that is misutilization of fund. It, of course, covers all the essentials of that diversification and the siphoning of the funds. But basically, all these are moving towards, when we say diversification or siphoning or misutilization, that means the whatever for the purposes the loans and borrowings have been sanctioned, the funds are not utilized for that purpose, and that's why one of the reasons the dispute could be there. So this is one important definition. I think this will help a lot to all the professionals because there are certain questions related to that. Again, as far as the requirements and the key aspects of this engagement, one important aspect, let me tell to you, is that these loans and borrowings, we are not restricting the scope of these standards only for the loans and borrowings from the financial institutions such as banks or the NBFC. So we have covered entire kind of an area related to the loans and borrowings, be it the loans and borrowings from the banks, from the NBFCs, or it could be the loans and borrowings, from the partners, or, in the companies also, there could be sometimes unsecured loans and borrowings. So we have covered the individual types of the borrowings in these standards, and that's why, and it is not only pertaining to the specific kind of loans. So that's why the title itself is very clear, that is loans or borrowings. So there could be some funding which could be in the form of loans, or it could be in the form of borrowings. And of course, it covers all the fund-based and the non-fund-based loans and borrowings equally. As far as the the forensic accounting and investigations professional is required. The first thing is that we should be aware about the legal and regulatory provisions related to the loans and borrowings. That is, must be with the bank or the NBFC or with the Companies Act related matter. And of course, again, what kind of an activities he has to collect? He has to collect the evidences related to that disputed matter, or basically the violation with the intent with respect of availment and utilization of the funds. So, and the key aspects in this, what are the key aspects? Of course, the key aspects as a performance of the work is related. Key aspects is the examination of that contractual matters, whether the loans and advances and the funds utilization is as per the contractual matters or as per the statutory or the regulatory provisions. And when we are actually doing this assignment, we are actually try to collect the evidences from asset tracing. The asset tracing, including the monetary trail. And of course, this is of course to ascertain whether the diversion or the siphoning of the funds has taken place or not. So that also we have brought out in the explanatory matters. What is asset tracing? A full para is describing what is asset tracing, which includes the part of this money trail in that also. And most interestingly, in these loans and borrowings kind of a standard, we have identified certain institutive nature of disputes also. So all the disputes, I mean, mostly we are talking about those kind of disputes, whether the funds utilized as per the contractual terms and conditions or not, or whether the loans or borrowings are misutilized, that is in the fraudulent manner, or even itself, when the loan procedure itself is not followed as per the established practices and established procedures, or even the loans might have been obtained by submitting the falsified or the forged kind of documents, and then there could be the disputes related to the timely repayment of the interest and the principal of the amount. So we have tried to cover all those disputes which are there related to this loans and borrowings transaction, and not limiting, again I'm saying, to towards the loans and borrowings from the banks or the financial institution, but all other types of the loans and borrowings in any other company or any other partnership firm, or even from the proprietorship point of view. We have covered all the aspects of those loans and borrowings in the standards, and I think that will be of a great help for those entities also. So that's quick brief about this 430 from my side. Thank you very much. And back to Harish.
Great, thank you. I have 2 standards to cover, 10 minutes, but I'll try to make it brief. I'll try to actually cover them in 5 minutes so that we can have some Q&A. In fact, some of the questions are relating to the reporting standard anyway. So what I'll do is let me quickly share the screen. Okay, I hope you can see my screen, 510 reporting results. Basically, the essence of 510 is to deal with the responsibility of the professional to issue a written report to the stakeholder. So the standard makes it a requirement that a written report ought to be issued at the conclusion of the engagement. Secondly, the result, the reporting should be in the form of results of the work procedures completed, number 1, and summary of findings from those procedures. And where required, a conclusion that can be drawn from the findings. That is more or less the essence of the report. And in fact, or the standard. In fact, the standard also very clearly says that the report should not express an opinion or pass a judgment over the guilt or innocence. Many times, this seems to have been the case where the engaging stakeholder is looking for some sort of independent opinion, especially in the form of whether or not party is guilty of a fraud or not. And this standard has laid out very clearly that cannot be the case wherever the professional is issuing a report. The issuance of a report which includes, for example, the passing of a judgment or guilt or innocence is not should not be part of the scope. So going through the provisions, the key provisions are that, like I said, a written report should be issued. It should be addressed to the primary stakeholders. The standard does not prescribe any fixed form or content of the report, but it does talk about certain key elements that should be there in each report. I'll just cover those in a minute. Sometimes the form and content of the report is mandated by the stakeholder or the statutory departments. Like I mentioned, as an example, the IBA seems to kind of mandate a report format. So that then the professional shall follow that. Where the mandate requires a discussion of the findings with the subject party prior to finalization, this report should include the responses received from those parties, so that generally they appear to be more balanced. In fact, that should normally be the case in any case, wherever a professional is carrying out any engagement and he's or she has observed certain observation, made some observation. It's good to be discussing those observations, at least the factual elements of it, to make sure that the professional has his facts absolutely correct, and that there's no misreading of the facts and things like that. Number 6, the report should highlight certain key assumptions that the professional may have made, or if there were any limitations that were placed on the professional in his ability to do the job. Certainly certain restrictions that may have come into play. Number 7, the report should not express an opinion, which I just mentioned. See, the thing is that the determination of culpability is actually either a disciplinary process, especially in organizations which have engaged a professional to do an internal investigation. So the receiving authority is also responsible for making a determination of the guilt or innocence. And they should just read the facts from the professional report and make their own judgment. And these, actually, there's generally what we call a disciplinary committee, for example. They would be the authority that establishes guilt or innocence. Or if the assignment is notified, with, let's say, an external agency or a bank or whatever, then they would receive the report with all the facts and the circumstances and everything, the findings, even a conclusion. But again, they would be the ones to making the final call on whether or not there has been a fraud or a violation. See, these things get very tricky. The people with legal knowledge and legal expertise are generally the ones who are best placed to take that call regarding violations and things like that. So that is why the standard is basically suggesting that the report should be limited to findings and conclusions. 8, the circumstances where, if there were any situation where the professional could not complete his whole assignment as per the terms of engagement, then a status report should be issued, kind of outlining the work completed and the limitations placed that did not allow the assignment to be completed and the report to be issued. So a status report in those situations should be issued. And of course, the standard has certain prescriptions regarding timely issuance of these reports and whatever. So that in essence is the standard on reporting results. Some questions have actually come up. I'll take a minute to answer a couple of questions that are very relevant to this right away. In fact, one of the questions, let me just quickly go through that. The IB has recently empaneled certain firms. This is a question. IB has recently empaneled certain firms as forensic auditors. We are also expected to give conclusions or our opinions on the matters noted by us. In these standards, we are mentioning as forensic accounting. We are mentioning as forensic accounting and need not give our opinions, but a conclusion. So that's what the standards are saying. How these anomalies will be addressed or resolved. So the question is, what do you do in the situation when there is a clear mandate to issue an opinion, whereas the standard is making that restriction, placing that restriction. So see, up to now, where there were no standards, the professional was almost obligated to follow what was expected or what was being mandated by the client. Now the professional will be able to point to the standard and say that it would not be appropriate for the standard to issue an opinion regarding guilt or innocence. And there's a clear standard that is guiding the professional not to do it. And now it's a matter of working together with the client and explaining to them why that is a role to be played by the receiver of the report with regard to the culpability of the individuals and not the job of the professional. And it would therefore actually be, you may be familiar with the concept of judge, jury, and executioner. You cannot have a conflict in the whole thing. You cannot have one person who is doing the job of many in the form of a judge, jury, and executioner. So the professional is an expert presenting the facts. Somebody else has to be the judge. And they need to perform the role by reading the report and coming to their own conclusions. They may take the help of a lawyer or whoever, but that's where the buck stops. So that is my personal opinion on this. Of course, this will get hotly debated more and more as we go along. So let me get back to my presentation. The last bit of my presentation. Okay, there are certain key elements of the report. The standard talks about a report that should have, for example, the title, the addressee, and who does the report get distributed to. The scope and objectives of the assignment, the approach and broad work procedures undertaken, an executive summary. This is very key. The executive summaries would be a snapshot, maybe in a page or two, that brings out the essence of some of the key points, 3-4 main key points. If there's an expert that is used, that should be made reference to within the report. And if the assignment has been, whether or not the assignment has been conducted through the application of these standards is very important. And then the list of findings and the evidences that have come up as maybe in annexures. The source of the evidences, where did you get the evidences from, and things like that. And finally, the assumptions, limitations, and disclaimers that has already been mentioned earlier. And then the conclusions that the professional may have been able to draw. Okay, the conclusions will generally be in the nature of for example, you point to a finding and say, based on that, it appears that there could be a violation in the nature of this, that, or the other, and make reference to the requirements of where the law that talks about what the requirement is and how the findings appear to be in contravention of those legal requirements, or it could be a code of conduct, or it could be just guidelines or something such as conflict of interest or whatever. And there the findings will talk about the fact that there is some relationship pointing towards a conflict of interest and things like that. But no independent conclusion talking about the fact that there is a fraud or there is a ethical violation or things of that nature. That is the job of the receiver of the report. Okay, Ji. So that's all to discuss on the report. Quality control. Basically, this is a standard that requires the professional to do his work in a high quality manner and meeting the expectations of the client and the receiver of the report. And it brings out certain new concepts, or not. These are not new concepts. If you are already a member of the institute, you would know about quality control system. You would know about competency development plan. You would know about quality control review. Those are the basic concepts that are covered in this standard. The main thing you need to know is that the standard is expecting the professional conducting forensic work or investigation work to at least have 5 of their annual CPE hours devoted to the area of FAI subjects, forensic subjects, investigation subjects. So it is basically expecting the professional to focus his continuing professional CPE training education focused in this area if you are conducting those kind of subjects. So that's all I wanted to discuss. I would like to now see if Dayan Nawazi is there, and if he would like to give us some concluding remarks before we take up some questions. There are a few questions that we can discuss before the webinar ends. Thank you. Anivasi, are you there? Or we can maybe take the questions while we have him rejoining us. In fact, Durgesh, there's one question pointed towards, I think, what you had covered.
Sir.
Would you like to take up that question?
So there are lots of questions which on my topic.
Yeah, you want to just go ahead? Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Yes. So, I mean, one thing, I got a phone call, so I missed your part. I don't know whether you answered any questions or not. But then one thing which we are getting is regarding defamation. So post-assignment, if there is litigation, so we have something called as predication. No fraud examination should be conducted without sufficient predication. There has to be something called as predication, that you have certain reasons to believe that a fraud is occurring, will occur, or has happened. Only then you start that. So please don't start a fraud examination without predication. There has to be some substance before you start pointing fingers. Then there's a question.
Yeah, very good point. Here I want to just add something. It's actually a part of basic principles where we talk about contextualization. Yes. It's important that you read that portion about predication, which Durgesh has just mentioned, because each and every assignment has to have a trigger in the form of some sort of a predication. So a good point, Durgesh. Go ahead.
Sir, then we see that with respect to FAIS 130, how can we effectively merge facts and natural justice together? With emerging technologies, is there any specific methodology for documentation? Now, see, because this is an investigative assignment and because it is a litigation support function, the principle of natural justice has to be imbibed in whatever you do. So there is no either or, that facts and natural justice cannot go hand in hand. They will go hand in hand. It is just that you have to present the facts. What are facts? Facts are simply the evidence of which you have. That will come under the definition of facts. And as to natural justice, say if we are given an assignment from a bank, then without even contacting the borrower, rather without even attempting to contact the other side, not just the borrower, or without even attempting to contact the other side, we cannot keep on writing certain derogatory or defamatory in that case, or certain things which are not palatable about anyone. The least what we can do is at least we can make a sincere attempt to get their side of the story. That is, I suppose, what is covered by principle of natural justice. Harish sir?
Yeah, very good point. In fact, a general observation that is required at this stage, because many of the questions are also taking us towards defamation and legal recourse by the other party. See, this is one area where whenever we get into forensics, you will recall the definition itself talks about court of law, which means that we are expected to have a certain amount of basic legal knowledge. And wherever we feel somewhat constrained in that area, then it behooves us to seek out expertise of a legal nature, make arrangements with certain legal experts to help us along the process. Because when we get to a court of law, then you need experts to guide you and support you, including, in fact, this legal support should be there right from the start, right from the time you're signing the engagement letter, because you may need to keep in mind that when you are at a point of reporting towards the end, what kind of a report you issue, to whom you issue it, and where that report may reach, including maybe the possibility of the report getting into the wrong hands or the party that is under subject matter, then there could be those risks of legal cases in terms of defamation or whatever, and you need to have legal support along the way. That is my reaction to that. But I see Dayanivas sir is back, and we would request him to, give his concluding thoughts and remarks. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Hariji. Thank you, Udebhai, Anand, and Durgesh, including Murli sir and Satish sir, who have actually contributed in this entire development process. Really, I think I just wrote Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter handle pay. I just wrote one thing: success story at ICAI. I think this is where the success story of ICAI is all about. When we are coming together, I know I'm repeating it again and again, but people have to listen again and again to just feel that, people at our level, when we talk about the Indian Chartered Accountants particularly, we are not on a commercial minded side only. It's primarily from, contributing. And friends, all of you might have seen these all gentlemen talking with that much of passion, as if, you can't even gauge what is the contribution that has been made by these people individually. I compliment each one of you, including Harish sir. I think the way you have led the entire team, we are very happy that, the most important part which I learned in this entire process was believe in some people, trust in some people, and the entire work, you cannot do it on your own. You need to continuously work with different people at different point in time. And all the people come together with a true spirit to give something back to the profession. And I think we all have demonstrated that very effectively in a true spirit that, this attitude never dies. 72 years of our firm, institute, I think is not a short time. Years together, people have contributed time and again. We have got the past presidents, current president, council members who have been incorporating a lot of new things in the process. But only the one thing which I would like to share with all my brothers and sisters who are listening to this entire discussion is that, opportunities are there for us. It is how we take that opportunity right. It is not that, those days are gone where the client knocks the door and come in and say that, okay, look, this is what I heard about you. It will happen in the current situation also, but after a particular stage. Time has come when we are seeing 70% of the firms are only proprietary concerns. And a lot of people, we have close to around 28,000 chartered accountants who have completed DISA, right? And close to 10,000 chartered accountants, I don't think less than that, who have completed forensic. Today, we are trying to think about, there are only large firms which are getting that opportunity. But no, We are keeping ourselves small. Obviously, when you want to do something big, you have to be somewhere big. And at least if you are not doing it as your practice, might be, Durgesh bhai, we have been deliberating at all times that, corporate form of practice, or might be a kind of separate entity that can be formed and that can be regulated. And I think this move, which ICAI has demonstrated to the nation, that we can contribute in a big manner, in a positive manner, making people responsible who are to be made responsible. In this forensic standards, friends, I think a 360-degree view has been put in. But one thing which I would like to say is, there was one discussion which was happening with one gentleman saying that, these are very small forensic standards. But the fact is, new technical guides are going to be, playing a critical role in this entire implementation. So just wait for, these kind of guides coming out. And I request each one of you who are listening to this program, write it to us. If you are interested and willing to participate, our both hands and arms are open. We will welcome you at Delhi. So that, this set of example of 65 can become 650 and 6,500 one point in time. Because lot need to be done. Forensic is an evolving subject. It is not just going to get in to design as an accounting standard or an Ind AS or IFRS or US GAAP, which is set. So here it is going to be different kind of cases are going to come, different kind of, situations are going to come. And we need to do a lot of research. And each one of you, I request you that, how can you actually participate with us on coming out with research papers? We'll be the happiest people to actually work with you. There is lot that can be done. This is just a beginning, not an end. And it is not even a comma or a full stop. It is just a continuing statement. Forensic standards are there. And this is the success story which we are demonstrating to the nation and the world, that we people work together and live together and ensure that the nation is going in all true spirit. $5 trillion economy is going to see a lot of challenges. Yes, but chartered accountants are going to be there to face it and guide people in true sense. Thank you all. Thank you very much for participating. I thank my chairman, Manu Agarwalji, who has actually been a motivator to me as a first timer in the council. He has given a lot of motivation and positivity, followed with the three president, Praful Bhai, and then Atul sir, and followed with, Nihar ji now. And Devashish ji is also going to be one of the most important person in the entire process. Friends, these all people who you are seeing on the screen, Harish ji, Durgesh, Murli sir, Uday, Anand, and there are many, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 60 are still there, whom I can start taking names, but it will be too longer for us to go through this process. But yes, experience of each and every person has added value to this institute's growth and demonstration that we all stand together for the nation building. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daya sir, for despite having 101 temperature, you are there as an inspiration to us to keep going despite all the hurdles and things that come in the way. I also want to request Amit to please show his face, because we would, like Daya sir said, everybody needs to maybe, come forward and help us. And if you can drop a note to Amit. Amit is here on the screen. Wave your hand, Amit, so that people can see you and send their name and suggestions to you. He's the secretary of DAP, and we look forward to getting your participation going by connecting with Amit. Thanks so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Goodbye.